And we are live. Welcome everybody to Lubbock Compact Live for Wednesday, April the 7th. I'm here with my co-host, Dr. Nicholas Bergfeld. We also have a special guest with us once again today, Chad Wheeler of Open Door, and we'll get with him a little later in the program as usual. Of course, you can follow us on Facebook. Make sure you like the page to keep up with updates when we go live or when we have updates just to inform citizens about different things going on. And visit lubbockcompact.com to volunteer or to donate or just to in general learn more about what we have done and what we're doing. So I guess we'll go ahead and get into the news updates, city updates for this week, Nick. We got quite a bit going on. I know we have some charter reform updates for everybody.
Yeah, and we'll start there. So Adam, you were present for this meeting today. So this was the first Charter Review Committee meeting hearing last week when we had incredible turnout, fantastic media coverage in making sure that this issue and the importance of it around at-large council positions, which is a tactic for voter suppression, that this was something that wasn't going to slip under the radar. And the community turnout, the support that everyone came to there really was quite amazing. And so we were hoping to see some momentum going into today's meeting. And Adam, how did you feel about the meeting that happened today?
Yeah, so they started out actually talking about that, in particular about the at-large issue. They did note, because they were specifically discussing the public hearing and kind of some of the comments they heard. So they did note once again and made the statement once again that term length for the mayor and at-large city council positions is something that they cannot do. The city staff also provided them with some documentation that had that in the section that was not to be changed, and so that's good. They made that very clear, and that's good that they made that very clear. They basically said about like the city council pay, which was the other big thing that we and others were calling for. They kind of all haven't really taken a stance on it yet. The general consensus was they're in listening mode. Bill Kernow basically said he was in listening mode. But we did have a little interesting thing with that document, right, Nick? The handout that they had.
Yeah, so that was a tough one. It's pretty, whenever you start doing citizen advocacy at these committee meetings, things like that, you notice that there's a lot of variability in what materials are available to the citizens during these. And so it's not uncommon that we'll go into one of these meetings and there's presentation materials and a lot of great information and insights that is publicly available. But for some reason, the city finds that they want you to essentially have to request it publicly after the event. And so as a citizen, you get frustrated because you feel as though you're not actually allowed to participate in what's going on, right? And so there's always essentially a ton of information that you're just simply not aware of. And so these meetings can be challenging to even follow. So one of the documents this committee got today was a color-coded, annotated write-up of the city charter and the sections that were no-go or go, or what they thought would be good for reform and things like that. Great recommendations that city staff provided that, if we're really being honest with it, it seems like all of the citizens of Lubbock should have that kind of information as we're going into these conversations and engagement. And so, it kind of snowballs in that way. And we see this in a lot of various committees that we turn out for. And then, if you remember, one of the committee members said that they hoped the 15th will be a more substantive conversation. I'm curious how you felt about that.
Yeah, I didn't like it. Just to be plain about it. I thought that it was a jab at what was going on. They were saying it was not substantive because of the at-large council position thing. Problem with that is that we needed them to state that, which they finally did at the end of that public hearing after 2 hours of testimony from citizens. And so that wasn't the ideal way it should have went. They should have out the gate, they should have said, this is off the table, but they didn't do that, which of course caused us to organize and mobilize as many people as we could to get there to make sure that they knew this was not something that people wanted. I thought that was a jab at that, because basically they were saying, well, we can't do that anyway, but you didn't say that, right? And so they've said it now a second time. So that part is, and the city also, Amy Sims from legal, actually today said that the city is not interested in trying to challenge any court rulings or anything of that nature. So yeah, I didn't really like that statement. I got a couple of comments on that as well. But on that document that Nick was just talking about, we did do the open records request as they directed us to do. And so we have our hands on that handout now. We're going to go through that, and we'll be posting that for everybody tomorrow to let everybody kind of see it. And we'll try to kind of give some insight about what it's kind of talking about, because it's really just a bunch of stuff, right, Nick?
Right, and credit to staff for being responsive in that way and getting this back to us. So when you do an open records request, the major concern there is they have over a week's worth of time to respond, and they're totally within their boundaries to do so. And in something like this, where the next public hearing is coming up so quickly, we were really thankful that they were that responsive to this. And so I'd say the other piece that came out of this conversation is that this committee is trying to figure out the best way to create an amendment around cleaning up the old language that's in the city charter. And there's a lot of old language, a lot of sections that we just don't need anymore, that are either outdated because state law preempts it, or it references things that no longer exist within our community, like the auditorium and the Coliseum. And so one of the big questions that they're deliberating internally is, which way do they want to propose this? Because their major concern is they don't want to clutter the November ballot when this would come up for an election. They don't want to clutter the ballot with an enormous number of amendments. And they were pretty much in agreement with some of the language that they thought would be appropriate. The only one that's controversial, and I do have the text, I'll just read that really quickly so folks know kind of where this debate is, was option number 4. So they had 4 different options of how this cleanup could happen. The only one that caused debate was the one that empowered the city council the most. And so the language was, shall the city council of the city of Lubbock, Texas be authorized to add a new charter section with the following language? So essentially adding a new piece to the charter that says, the city council may pass an ordinance by a supermajority vote to update code references in the charter that have been recodified by the Texas legislature. So that's a complicated way of saying that rather than going through this very long process where all citizens have to vote on changing these things, that when it comes to things that the state of Texas's laws now supersede that are in our charter, the council could reform those things without having to go to a ballot initiative, things like that. There were some members on the committee that wanted to explore this topic a bit more and shared some and had some reluctance around the idea of the council being this empowered. So this is something we'll talk sort of more about, but I think those are kind of the updates from today's meeting. And so what's sort of the next step for folks, Adam, in terms of, next meeting and what's the next step on getting engaged in this?
Yeah, so we actually have the next 3 meeting dates. They went ahead and set those. And then, of course, the public hearing. So the public hearing is next week on the 15th at 5:30 p.m. We are calling for as many people to either come out or come on the Zoom to publicly speak, or to prepare an email comment, and we'll get everybody that email ahead of that meeting. But you can go ahead and start preparing your email if you'd like. We're trying to call as many citizens as possible, and the committee is actually saying the same thing. They want to hear from as many citizens as possible on the city council pay issue. What would you approve of? Do you approve of a living wage? 65% of the people that we polled, which was over 200 people, responded from all 6 districts of Lubbock. 65% of those people were in support of a salary of $60,000 per year for those positions. If you look at like the county commissioners, they make $100,000 a year, and depending on who you talk to, they do the same amount or less work. So that's kind of where we're at there. Of course, you could put your own number in there, but just whatever your thoughts on this are, we need as many people as possible to provide your input so that they can deliberate over this. And then so the meeting dates, of course, public hearing on the 15th at 5:30. And then the regular meetings that they have, there's no public comments, but you can watch on Zoom. And that's basically what happened today. And that's where they'll discuss things. And they'll also discuss what they've heard at public comments. So if you want to kind of follow along the process, the next meeting would be on the 21st, which would be at 11:30 a.m. at Citizens Tower in the chamber again. And then the next one after that would be the 26th, Monday the 26th at 11:30 a.m. And then the only other one they scheduled today was May 5th at 11:30 a.m. And so that's the dates for the upcoming meetings. And of course, we'll let everybody know about that. So I guess the next thing, Nick, we have is the UDC, which is the Unified Development Code. I know that sounds like really kind of technical, and some parts of it are, but let's go into that a little bit, Nick, as far as what's going on there.
Yeah, so the Unified Development Code, super important document for revitalization in the city of Lubbock. There are a lot of best practices that we know from across the United States that if we implemented in the city of Lubbock, when it came to creating this Unified Development Code, it would have a major impact on our communities. And so what is it? A Unified Development Code is a way to incorporate zoning, which involves land, as well as codes, which involves the buildings. It allows you to put all of these things into one comprehensive picture so that rather than in a fragmented way, you're talking about just say what land use is supposed to be, and then just what buildings are supposed to look like, you can tailor those to specific environments. And so an important meeting happened earlier on this week where the Comprehensive Plan Oversight Committee, so they have oversight in their name, were created were part of the promise that came out of the 2040 land use plan process. This is something that we've talked about, and I believe we'll have Adam Pirtle on who can talk more about this in detail, the history of racist zoning and industrial policies in the city of Lubbock. And so one of the aspects that came out of that process was the city acknowledged that history, and they said that they wanted to move forward in making sure that future documents that the city would sign off on, master plans for, we'll say, parks, transit, impact fees, one of the issues that we were heavily involved in, that this oversight committee would make sure that the city stayed true to the commitments that they made in the 2040 plan. And so this oversight committee just met again for only the second time in terms of these conversations at the beginning of this week. And it was a bit of a challenging conversation where there was some friction between their expectations and what staff was kind of to them. And Adam, you were able to be present for that one. You know, what was it like in the room?
Yeah, just right off of the bat, I'm really encouraged about this committee. A lot of the people I've that are on there, I've had a chance to speak to them one-on-one or in different settings about these issues, and I really do think that they seem to be genuinely concerned with carrying out the recommendations, like he said, in Plan Lubbock 2040, which is the land use plan. And in Plan Lubbock 2040, it specifically states, like throughout the entire document, that special attention needs to be paid to the older areas of town, especially East and North Lubbock inside of the loop, but also Central Lubbock. As many of you know that may live in those areas, there's a lot of issues that have just never been addressed, a lot of neglect that has gone on, and they seem genuinely concerned about that. And so that's really encouraging, just right off of the bat. Nick and I and Josh gave some public comment there. And the purpose of our public comments were basically just to kind of inform the committee of some of these concerns, and where we kind of saw things going, and then just kind of urging them to challenge the consultants to kind of get this right. And so there was some contention there between staff and the committee once they did push back on kind of what they were being told, and there was a lot of confusion in the meeting because so for instance, they were told that the consultants were told not to look at East and North and Central Lubbock, but there's like 85 pages on downtown. So like just to kind of illustrate this, there was more attention shown to the Depot District itself than to all of East, North, and Central Lubbock combined. So again, it was pretty crazy in that way. And so they were pushing back and saying they didn't understand that, as we don't. And staff was kind of pushing back on them. But the end result basically was the committee told them, look, just we need to get this figured out, you know, what we can do, what we can't do, because one of the things that the staff tried to tell them was that we can take care of some of the zoning in East, North, and Central Lubbock at a later time, like
Right.
in a later budget process. Nick, maybe you can chime in here about that whole kind of confusing situation that they
Yeah.
brought up.
So I've never so I've watched a lot of City of Lubbock committee meetings, you know, in the past 4 years or so. I've never seen staff so actively attempt to undermine a committee's operations as that meeting, and it really was it was so clear that their purpose of going into that meeting was to try everything under the sun to prevent the oversight committee from having oversight of anything related to the Unified Development Code. And their efforts were to try to say it's impossible because the contract doesn't allow for new zoning, when in fact, in the meeting itself, the director for planning said that we've never had this kind of zoning before. And he was talking about a new kind of zoning that Lubbock has never implemented, or codes, you could say, that Lubbock has never implemented, that are about design standards and quality. And what we were all frustrated by is that the topic of conversation for this meeting, they broke the Unified Development Code into sections that they're calling modules. This was all about Module 2. Module 2 was exclusively about downtown and giving downtown new types of quality code standards that will ensure that new properties being built downtown will adhere to a new character and vision of what downtown is supposed to look like. It is a very powerful tool for guiding the kinds of development that happens in areas. And in parts of Lubbock, like in sort of the eastern portions and now some of the northern portions, where we've seen a spread of low quality housing developments, you know, where their design standards aren't necessarily up to where they should be in terms of quality of life, you know, they're building disposable housing. You know, there are legitimate issues that reforms to these types of codes will have an incredible impact on those communities. And yet we're doing all of it for downtown. We acknowledge its existence. We acknowledge the power of these codes and what they're capable of. And somehow staff in this meeting had to walk the tightrope of pretending like they weren't doing revitalization through zoning and simultaneously talking about revitalization through zoning for downtown for an entire meeting. And so the conflict there was just so clear. So it's frustrating to see that. I do think that as the oversight committee pushes more on this, we need to empower them as citizens. And so they're meeting once a month now, the first Monday of the month. And so we'll give you a heads up when that next meeting is. But really, we'd love for you to be involved in that conversation and to empower this committee to make sure that they're staying engaged in a meaningful way. So, you know, we'll have more updates as these conversations move on. Is sort of brief other news. So the Lubbock Compact, actually, we had a little bit of a small collaboration with Texas Tech's Youth Mappers program. So this is something that's actually sponsored by the federal government through their aid division. So these types of projects are typically done in humanitarian situations where you have a bunch of volunteers who are going through a lot of satellite imagery, and they're using human intelligence, they're using their brains to be able to document how landscape has changed, where infrastructure is, like roads and things like that, to map out areas that have either had impact or areas that previously haven't been mapped in this way. And when they map them, they put this into an open source of information that anybody can publicly access and utilize and analyze. So there's a lot of cool work that can come out of that. And so they decided, and my understanding is this is the first time that USAID has done this with their program. But Lubbock is the first time where they've ever done a project domestically, so here in the United States. And it's mapping the locations of dirt streets and throughout the eastern portion of the city and potentially the northern portion, depending on how much they get done. So, thank you to Youth Mappers and to Texas Tech's Geography Department for putting this together. A lot of folks are excited about that, and I've enjoyed seeing the energy coming from the work that they do. And data is important to all the conversations that we have. The last one, which I just feel like we have to mention, because of the Chris Beard saga. So that ended quite quickly, which is fantastic. And so now we can celebrate our new coach, Mark Adams, who had an incredible press conference just the other day. Shout out to Two Docs for providing beverages for folks who wanted to come out and celebrate his hire. A deeply emotional 30-minute introduction where you can just simply tell that his heart truly bleeds for West Texas. We're all excited about it. I think Coach Adams is going to be great for us. And so a very exciting development in this kind of very quick little Chris Beard saga. But I think everything's on the up and up. And I think Red Raider Nation is just excited about what's going to come forward. So those are all the news updates that I have.
Yeah. And so we're a little bit down the road here, so we need to get with our guests. But before we do that, if you're enjoying listening to the show, or if you've been following the work of Lubbock Compact and you would like to help out, of course, we do this all for free. This is all volunteer. Anything that you've seen come from Lubbock Compact thus far has been through pretty much either volunteering or people in the compact putting up their own money sometimes. And so if you would like to help us with this mission, we are now able to take donations. And so you can go to lubbockcompact.com/donate. We have some preset options on there that you can choose from. You can do, recurring amounts if you'd like to do that. Any amount helps. And it's all going to go back into doing the work that Lubbock Compact does, which of course is things like this show and other ways of educating and informing citizens, and just in general taking action to make sure that that we have good governance here in Lubbock, and that we're making this place a little bit better than it has been. So great city, but it can be a lot better, and I think we all know that. So if you'd like to donate, please consider doing that. And so we'll go ahead and get to our guest. And so joining us today is Chad Wheeler. Chad is the CEO of Open Door. That's a local nonprofit organization and one of the most successful community development organizations, serving Lubbock's homeless population. So Chad, welcome to the show.
Hey, Adam, Nick, thanks for having me.
All right. So we have some questions for Chad. And again, just a reminder, anybody that's tuned in, if you're on the Zoom or if you're on the Facebook, you can put your questions in the Q&A on the Zoom, or you can put them in the comment section on the Facebook. And there's also a link there in the comment section that you can actually join the Zoom. And if you'd like, you can actually speak your question. And we're happy to answer those. And I'm sure Chad is also just as happy to answer those. So the first question we have, so you recently wrote the first comprehensive history of homelessness here in Lubbock. So could you talk about kind of how that played out? What was that journey like?
Yeah, so it was a fascinating experience for me. A lot of people know early last year, I don't know when it was, kind of at the beginning of the pandemic, the first disparity report was published by Nick, and a lot of attention, a lot of good conversations coming out of that. And I guess towards the summer, we talked, and he was saying that, Lubbock Compact wants to add some different angles to the conversation, to the disparity report, and bring in different aspects of disparity within our community. And having worked in homelessness in Lubbock since 2005, I was like, definitely, I would love to write about this. It's something I think about every day. And so a lot of the things that I got to write about, the interesting thing was I lived through a lot of those things. When we're talking about the the ordinance downtown and the start of Tent City and all the kind of attempts to push people out of areas. I was there, and for some of that before I was around, my mentor Jim Beck and Carpenter's Church, which is now Open Door, was around in the days and actually started in North Overton with the displacement of a lot of people, including our community from that area in the late 90s, early 2000s. So it was very fascinating to read through it, go through it. Walked away with some big takeaways, kind of some trends that happened over time. You can see Lubbock repeatedly trying to push people and problems into different areas. That's kind of how we've gone about dealing with things we don't like. We just kind of say, let's get over there, let's create an ordinance, let's do something to push it away. But we're rarely interested in doing something to solve the problem that's there. We like to shuffle it around. And then also just, it was the deepest dive that I've ever done into the numbers, the demographics, information on homelessness, as well as housing here in Lubbock. And so that was very eye-opening to see kind of the variety of what homelessness looks like. So many times when people talk about homelessness and we think about it, it's just this blanket idea of homelessness, people in homelessness. And the reality is there are many subpopulations, there are many experiences and different interventions that match up with different subpopulations and needs. So you can't just, do one thing. It's not a problem you hit with a hammer. It's very detailed and specific in the kinds of responses that we have to develop.
Yeah, and to build off of this, because I think it's an important part of the conversation that just establishes your bona fides in this topic. The fact that both you have this lineage and this history of seeing these challenges unfold within our community over time. And it's just, to read the report that you created in that, it's just so definitive where we are, linking these aspects of displacement of populations and the ways that policy has played a role in that throughout this period in time. I just think that's so incredibly powerful in the way that you've structured that and written about it. And with that, I do think, so you are a firsthand witness to so much of this, and even the transitioning in the way that people think about housing policy. And I'm just kind of curious, what, when you think of your journey with that and thinking about, your experiences with your mentor, Jim Beck, and the lineage there, how do you, where do you go in your mind when you think about it?
So homelessness is a people issue. And too often we talk about it removed from the humanness of homelessness. And we want to have homeless ordinances or move the homeless problem or whatever. These are people and people's lives that we're talking about. And so for me, that's a huge part of this. I loved getting into the numbers and the history and even the policies and things that have impacted this people group. And we cannot get away from recognizing that this is a people group, and with human individuals who have stories and rights and dignity that we need to respect. And, I could go on and on about it. It might come up later, but there are some things that I think we do when it comes to homelessness that if we did when it came to, say, a racial demographic, and we're talking about racial disparity, everyone in the room would say, that's racist. How dare we talk about people that way? How dare we suggest that about that entire group of people? It would be terrible. But we do it with a class of people whose housing status is a particular type. And we don't even think about it as being disparaging, and it definitely is. So, the human side of it, I've tried to incorporate some of that and even the dignity that is needed in addressing the issue into the report.
Yeah, that's really great. Some great things there. So I know a lot of people, and just reminder everybody, if you have questions, put those in the comments or in the Q&A. One of the things that comes up, I guess, in terms of addressing these kind of issues is the housing first. So can you kind of talk about what does that mean for you,
Sure.
the housing first thing?
Yeah, so I think one of the first things that's important to note about housing first is that it is a phrase that's thrown around like crazy these days, and a lot of people will claim that they use the housing first approach in what they do, and they have no clue what they're talking about. And I have heard local leaders criticize housing first, and they clearly have no idea what they're talking about. And for some of them, they think that housing first is housing only, or housing first is just about putting people in housing quickly and having no rules, no expectations or whatever. That is not what housing first is. It is an evidence-based approach to ending homelessness, and it's been adopted. It started in the 90s, but it's been adopted as a global best practice. And so if you are being funded through, say, HUD to provide homeless services or housing throughout the United States, it is a typical expectation that you practice housing first principles in what you do. And so I think, the name itself is helpful, in understanding that the first thing that we really try to solve is homelessness through housing. Like my t-shirt says, the solution to homelessness is a home. And housing first says you got to start there, and you do that by creating a very low barrier for people to enter into housing. Too often in the old model was, we want you to get everything in order. We want you to jump through these programs, go through multiple steps, get everything sorted, and then maybe you'll end up in housing. Too often, though, people who have chronic issues like mental health issues, substance use disorder, co-occurring disorders, they just kept falling down the ladder and never could get to the end goal of housing. That's why we have such extensive chronic homelessness in the United States. The system has prevented people from getting out of homelessness and staying in it for decades. And so housing first says, stop trying to get everybody to fix everything before housing. Start with housing, and then you can begin to address a lot of the issues. Like getting clean and sober is a whole lot easier when you have a place to sleep. Addressing your health issues is so much easier. Getting employment, all these things, staying out of jail, in fact, is a whole lot easier when you have a house. If you are living in public and you have no place to go, it is a human necessity to use the bathroom, but that can land you in jail pretty easily. Housing is a great starting point. Housing first says, let's start there, and we'll be able to deal with a lot of other things. But the really important part about housing first that a lot of people miss is it's not housing only, it's housing first plus a robust support system that's tailored to the needs of each person. And so for some people, they're going to need a lot of case management support. They're going to need people in their homes maybe daily, helping with mental health, physical disabilities, whatever it might be. For some people, you get them into housing and they're able to kind of take the reins and run with it without a lot of support. But whatever support they need, it's got to be provided or else it fails. We've seen so many people get into housing and not have the support system they need in place, and that just causes people to return to homelessness. So both of them are needed, housing and support, to make housing first work.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so the next question, I guess along these same lines is, so what do you see as the top 3 barriers to changing the community's response overall to addressing homelessness?
Okay. Yeah, this was really hard to narrow down to 3, but I really think there are a lot of great people and a lot of great things going on in Lubbock. But one of the things I've seen over the last 15 years is that Lubbock really has moved from kind of a mom and pop environment where you have these ministries that are just doing their best. But today the system is much more there's so many different variables to it. There's so many different people and things going on that we've got to make the switch, and we have not yet switched from thinking as individuals and operating in silos to working as a system. There's a lot of pushback to that because a system requires us to be accountable with each other. It requires us to have hard conversations. It requires us to prioritize the collective mission rather than my organization's, goal and fundraising goal or whatever it is that's driving my individual organization. But really, when you see communities like ours, mid-sized cities and larger making progress in these areas, Denton, Abilene are two that have done some really good things recently. You see a collective system level work that's taking place. So I think that's a big one. The second, and it's tied to this, is we've got to seriously practice what's called coordinated entry. And so coordinated entry is a system level approach that basically says nobody shows up at the wrong door. So previously, if you went to the Salvation Army, you hoped that they had what you needed, and if they didn't have what you needed, you either go somewhere else or you take what they've got because you're there, Same with organizations across the city. And with Lubbock, the kind of geographic expanse that we have, it's very difficult for people to just wander from place to place, hoping they get to the right spot. And so coordinated entry basically says, wherever you show up, you are going to be assessed in a shared database and a shared system that says, say you show up at Open Door and you're a veteran and you're in homelessness, immediately through our assessment, you're going to be flagged, and that's going to show up on VetStar's radar and the VA's radar. And if you need those kinds of resources, they're going to quickly set you up with rapid rehousing or whatever resource you need with them, and vice versa. Across the system, you're going to be triaged, prioritized based on your need, and then quickly directed to the most appropriate intervention. That we have to do that if we really want to make progress. Gone are the days when we just serve the people we like or serve whoever shows up first. That's not how we solve homelessness. And then lastly, and I talk more about this in the report, we have to treat people in homelessness. We have to stop treating people in homelessness as the problem. Homelessness is the problem. We fight homelessness. We don't fight people in homelessness. And as a community, too often we think those people there are the problem. We need to move them out of the way. They're the ones that are trying to disrupt my business and do this and whatever. We don't realize that it's a condition of their circumstance, and the circumstance is what really needs to be solved, not moving that person out of the way.
Gotcha. And real quick, Nick, before you get to the next question, we do have some questions coming in. Thank you for those. We will get to those here in just a second. Again, please continue to submit those and we will get to those. So yeah, sorry, Nick, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about COVID, but before we go there, Chad, just because of what you said, I'm curious if you could talk more about how important language is and the way that we use language. You brought up this topic, and it makes me think about a period in time where there was a homelessness task force the city of Lubbock created, and one of the individuals on that committee referred to individuals currently experiencing homelessness as being zombies, is one example of the things that were said. And I even find in my own life, making sure that I'm separating the words that I use to say currently experiencing homelessness versus calling somebody homeless, right? Or somebody who is homeless. And I'm curious if you could just chat a little bit about language and how we should be mindful of that.
Sure. I think for most of us, language ends up being a very subtle thing that we don't think about enough. And so we're very quick to say the homeless or homeless issue, or I'm going down to feed the homeless, and we label an entire group of people in a way that's really not very dignified. Just like a lot of other people groups, again, we would prefer people first language to maintain that dignity. and maintain the humanity of the people that we're talking about. Usually it can be, I typically find that it's very subtle things like just trying to say people in homelessness rather than the homeless. But you know, in its worst forms, like you said, we dehumanize people. And every single time we have seen policy issues or city controversial issues around homelessness going on, you see, and when I looked through, I mean, I read all the news articles on homelessness and everything I could find from Lubbock's history. And without fail, you see over and over and over again, dehumanizing language around people in homelessness, because it's a whole lot easier to clear out dozens and dozens of people from sleeping around the Mahon Library without any plan for where they should go when they are, you know, just zombies or, you know, dirty and criminals or whatever we want to call them to help us justify why we are treating them so inhumanely.
Awesome. So I'll ask just I guess our kind of finishing questions here, and then we'll go into the citizen questions that are coming in. So if all the Lubbock citizens or a lot of Lubbock citizens were just highly motivated, they've heard this, they're ready to do something. If everybody was just highly motivated to tackle this issue, how long would that take? So that's part one. And then what are some effective ways that you found to get people engaged and motivated? And then the last part of it is like, what's a goal everyone can just wake up tomorrow and start doing on this issue?
For sure. So 12 months, we can solve chronic homelessness.
Oh, wow.
So, you know, back to subpopulations and homelessness not being just a monolith. When we talk about tackling this issue, it's different for different groups. The average length of time for a person in homelessness in the US is less than 30 days. So for most people, it's a very high turnover rate. For most people staying at the Salvation Army, for Women's Protective Services, a lot of temporary stay shelters here and around the country, people are in and out very quickly, high turnover rates. So solving that problem is going to take unique measures. Solving chronic homelessness is the world that I work in mostly. And with chronic homelessness, you have a very low inflow outflow. You know, it's a very static population, subpopulation. So right now in Lubbock, we have about 50 people in what's called permanent supportive housing. And our numbers for chronic homelessness are the best numbers that we have available to us right now are from the 2020 PIT count, where we counted 40 individuals at the time. And at the time, we only had 40 in housing. So if we're talking based on that count, another 30 people, right now at Open Door, we're housing about five people a month with our program. We have funding to house 75, at least 75 this year. So we've got about another 25 to go. But for this, I kind of just threw out the number 100. If we had 100 people in chronic homelessness, because we don't perfectly know the inflow outflow numbers, but if we shot for 100, which is, I think, you know, well within the range of how many people in chronic homelessness, we could do it in 12 months. It would cost us an additional $900,000 a year, so roughly $2.2 million a year. We already have 1.3 million secured for each year for 75 people. So, you know, when we talk about solving these problems in Lubbock, I think one of the big things to note is that this is a very solvable problem. You know, it's not like other cities where you're talking thousands and thousands of people and it's going to take a massive effort. You know, 50 more people, if you told somebody from Austin or Dallas or LA that all you have to do is solve 50 more people, they'd be like, done, you know, nothing. So really, it's a very achievable thing for us to do in Lubbock. So, you know, in the question of effective ways to get people engaged, I'm a firm believer on focusing on solutions. A lot of times, unfortunately, with homelessness, I hear a lot of organizations kind of focusing on the negatives, like there's just this many people and it's so bad, and here's a picture of a baby and I want to make you like heartstrings care about this. Yeah, I mean, I have some issues with the dignity and kind of respecting dignity of people in the way that we market kind of the need. But in West Texas, where we have conservative, economically conservative folks, focusing on how what we're doing works, like our housing retention rate for our Open Doors program is like 93%. That means of all the people that we house, 93% have stayed housed over the last 3 years. Cost savings, we save an estimated $800,000 a year just in our program as it is right now because of the cost it takes to house people versus the estimated cost to leave them in homelessness. The improvement in healthcare utilization. So like people in housing in Lubbock go to the ER half as much as people in homelessness. We have a recent study that has just found that, and the details on that will be coming out pretty soon. So things like that, showing people that it does work. This is what can be done, and let's do it. I feel like that motivates in West Texas, as much as anything. And I think the thing that we can all do tomorrow, wake up tomorrow, and even tonight, is become an advocate for housing first. If we as a community champion the truth that the way to solve homelessness is to get people into a home and help support them there, then we would make some headway. But if we keep believing the myths that, people just want to be homeless and this problem can't go away, and these are just bad people who are lazy or whatever, and blah, blah, blah. If we stop perpetuating those myths, and the next time your neighbor or your family member says, those people just want to be homeless, you can say, Open Door has housed 50 people in Lubbock, and no one they've tried to help get into housing has said no. No one. So this idea that people want to be homeless, we're not finding it. When we go to people and we say, hey, we'll help you get into housing, nobody has turned us down on that, and so it can be done. We're doing it. And, let's be an advocate for real solutions and not just pushing problems to the side.
Yeah, definitely. I think I trust the people who do this day in and day out more than anybody else. So that's some good info there. So we'll go ahead and get into the questions. Again, if anybody has any questions, you can put them in the comments on the Facebook. You can put them in the Q&A on the Zoom. And then we also have the Zoom there if you'd like to call in on the Zoom. So the first one is from Danielle. She says, how do you feel about the homelessness that is going on in Austin, as well as the city's plans to vote on a new ordinance around it? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, a little bit. So it's it's a little bit funny, and y'all don't necessarily realize this, but Lubbock and Austin have gone through very similar things. Lubbock's just a little ahead of Austin's time. So I'll explain. So, in 2010, when Lubbock passed the ordinance to make it illegal for most people to stay around public property, what we inadvertently did was make homelessness a very visible problem. So if you remember, right after 2010, you had this group of people that set up tents right on Broadway and Q, right at the entrance to downtown. And all of a sudden, the people that had been very get homelessness out of here are showing up with coffee saying, we've got to solve this problem because it's so visible. So Lubbock kind of accidentally created a very visible problem with that ordinance. Austin intentionally created a very visible problem by, removing some of the ordinances that made it illegal to sleep in a lot of places. So by, the law, the ordinance they passed, 2 years ago now, basically resulted in a very visible form of homelessness. It has not increased homelessness. It's definitely not increased homelessness. It's only made it more visible. And that is the big problem that a lot of people have, is now they're seeing all these people who used to be in the woods and behind buildings in places where we didn't want, we wanted them out of sight and out of mind. And in a way that is a positive, Any business owners who are listening to this, they're going to like die of a heart attack that I said that's a positive. I'm not advocating that that's not the end game. But if you see the problem of homelessness, then there can be motivation to do something about it. And one of the unique things that is going on in Austin is you have a very diverse constituency who has the opportunity to work together to solve a very big problem that otherwise they don't ever work together to solve. So when homelessness becomes very visible, you do have developers, city leaders, businesses, all the advocates. They're all on the same page of, we got to do something about this. And that can be a really good thing. Some of what they're trying to do is similar to what we did, which was, let's create a tent city that's both there and here, right beyond our historic red line, in an industrial area, still out of sight, out of mind, and that appeases enough of the, typical opponents for the problem to go away. And so it doesn't always result in positive solutions. It's debatable about what, if that is going to be a positive solution in Austin. I'm not in a position to really say, but lots of similarities there, a lot to learn from.
A lot of good insight on that. My mom lives in Austin, and I definitely have seen kind of the evolution of that over the years. And she has mentioned that before, as far as the homeless situation. It's as you said, bigger city. It's really tricky out there. So we have another question from Ben. He said, Chad touched on this, and now I'm curious. Is it that the people in charge of the city all said, hey, let's move all these people of color from here to there? Or was it more of an organic thing that just happened because of inherent biases? And does it matter if it was one or the other?
Well, I'm not entirely clear on the question, but since you mentioned people of color, our historic systemic racism continues to impact homelessness. So with the racial disparities in poverty and in lots of areas, you see in homelessness. And so people of color are disproportionately represented within homelessness. And so, at least in the last 30 years, in my research of what's gone on in Lubbock, I didn't necessarily find overt racism in homeless policy, although it's hard to separate the two. If you're dealing with a group that is way disproportionately people of color, then you can't really separate the racial issues from the way you deal with that particular group. I think most of the time homelessness is dealt with as a class of people, and not necessarily, at least in recent years, based on the racial demographics of it, at least from my research. But like I said, the two are definitely interwoven. I think, when it comes to any whoever is decided to be an undesirable group, historically Lubbock has, we're talking long history, but even recent history, has said, let's put some kind of barrier. Maybe that's created by an ordinance, geographic barrier, redevelopment, revitalization, zoning, code, whatever it is. Right. A lot of those end up, whether their intention is racist, the impact tends to be racist.
Gotcha. So we have a question here from Jim Beck, our buddy Jim Beck. He says, how have the demographics of people experiencing homelessness changed over the years in Lubbock, and what new challenges has that presented?
Yeah, so like I said, I've only been around for the last 15 years, but from what I can tell, we have PIT data from the early 2000s to today that shows us demographics. And so based on that, we can see an increase in more equity and gender. So, historically it was predominantly, 70, 80% men that we saw in homelessness in Lubbock. Today, it's very close to 50-50 between men and women. And I think another big increase that we've seen in recent years has been in young adults. So 18 to 25. So we're seeing a lot of people coming out of foster care. We're seeing a lot of young LGBTQ youth who are either aging out of foster care or leaving homes because of rejection and things like that there. And so, in the short time I've been around, like in the first few years, it was like hanging out with a bunch of old men at Open Door. That's what we did. And today it is a very different looking group of people.
Okay, so we have another question here from Sean. Says, what about people that have lost their homes due to the pandemic that are living with family members?
Great question. So we really don't know yet the impact of the pandemic. So the numbers, the most recent numbers we have are from January 2020. And so right now it's a big guessing game as to the impact of COVID on homelessness as a whole here in Lubbock and across the country. And so two things that I think are really important. This is a long topic to discuss, but two things that I really think are important. One is that the eviction moratorium that has been in place for most of the last year and is technically still in place with the CDC has helped prevent some evictions. From what I've seen in Lubbock, we haven't seen large scale evictions yet, leading into homelessness. But if you know anything about what's going on in Texas, the Texas Supreme Court has just recently said, we're not going to enforce the CDC moratorium. And so the gates are open for Texas landlords to evict right now. And so there is a question of, is that going to bring an eviction tsunami? There's a lot of concern that that might happen in Texas. That paired with the reality, when you look at what funding has come out, and there's been an unprecedented amount of funding that has been made available through the relief packages, billions of dollars. Just this most recent one, $25 billion was made available for rental assistance, and $5 billion was made available for homeless assistance. So basically what that means is we're giving a huge amount of money to help keep people in housing and not return to home or not enter homelessness. Hopefully that works. There's some big questions about our efficacy with that in the past, but a very small amount of money has been given comparatively to helping people who are actually in homelessness. The problem is pre-pandemic, we've seen an increase in homelessness and an increase in unsheltered homelessness nationally and in Texas. So there's a lot of reason to believe that we are going to continue to see those numbers be high and possibly increase because the funding that's gone out has not necessarily matched the need within homelessness. It may have matched a lot of the need for helping people stay in housing, but it's not necessarily matched the need for helping people exit homelessness.
Yeah, and so that actually goes with the last question that we have from David. He says, now that evictions are starting up again, in your view, should helping people stay at home when they are in danger of being evicted be part of a comprehensive effort to end homelessness? So how important is prevention in your opinion? I know you just said that the funding is not enough, but I would assume it's pretty important, right?
Yes, prevention is really important. However, it is really hard to do well. And I talk about this a little bit in the report. There's just not a lot of clear indicators that a person is going to enter homelessness. So, a family calls up to the city of Lubbock, rental assistance says, hey, I'm having a hard time paying my rent. Money goes out the door to help them pay the rent or the utilities. There's zero way of determining whether or not that person would have ended up in homelessness or not. And so there is a big question of the effectiveness of eviction prevention. It's not necessarily homeless prevention, and you're not always clear if the resources are having the true impact that they're intended to have. And so that may be a non-answer, but it's kind of it's a hard thing to say.
Yeah,
so
we actually have one more that popped in, and we'll have to cut off questions after this one. It's already 8:01, so we'll go ahead and take this last one from Natalie. And she says, thank you for all that you continue to do in serving our homeless population. There are organizations in Lubbock that are serving our homeless population in different ways, be it women and children, ex-offenders, individuals who have experienced different traumas, etc. In your opinion, what is lacking in the efforts, if any, and what can we do as citizens to aid in the efforts?
Yeah, big questions. So big picture, I think we need to focus more on solving homelessness and less on managing homelessness. So we spend a lot of time, effort, and resources on managing homelessness, feeding people. I mean, kind of not, obviously I support feeding people, don't hear me say otherwise. But the first instinct that people have when they think about homelessness is, let's feed people. Well, the reality is, if everybody thinks, let's feed people, you can feed people every meal for 20 years, like a lot of soup kitchens have in Lubbock, and they continue to serve the same patrons day after day, week after week. And if I'm here working at a soup kitchen and I see the same people walking through my door for 20 years, I should be asking myself why, and why can't we as a community do something more to stop people from being stuck in this kind of survival relief mode? So I think we've got to really put a lot more interest and investment into ending homelessness and solving problems rather than just managing it. And it is super easy to have great intentions and big hearts and manage things in a way that just perpetuate problems, poverty, homelessness, all those things. So there are like 1,000 little things that go with that, but big picture wise, I think we as a community, we really need to focus on solving problems in a big way rather than just managing things.
That's great response. Great questions, everybody. Nick, do you want to tell everybody where they can get this information from?
Yeah, so all of this is published in the most recent version of Lubbock Disparity Report. You can go to lubbockcompact.com to download that, and then also to see all the other information that we put on there. The first version of our newsletter has come out, and so I have an article about why the East Side needs its own economy, and our own Joshua Shankles, the Garden City Initiative coordinator, has written the case for why the city of Lubbock needs to expand green space. So some exciting developments there, but definitely please, if you'd like to be more informed, check out the homelessness section of the Disparity Report. Truly is masterful work. So thankful for Chad's contributions to all this and this wonderful conversation.
Yeah, and just thank you, Chad, once again for all the great information and for all the work that you guys are doing out there. Very commendable, very appreciated, I'm sure, by a lot of folks. And so everybody, just want to remind you, if you would like to help with the work of Lubbock Compact, you can go to lubbockcompact.com/donate. There's also information about volunteering if that's what you'd like to do, or you can just read the Disparity Report, as Nick said, and kind of see what we're up to and follow along. Also, I would just like to remind everybody, we do have a YouTube channel. It's just Lubbock Compact. If you could help us out and subscribe to that, we do upload these there. And we also have this in audio form for you. And so we'll have all those links available for you. And again, follow us on Facebook, Lubbock Compact, and keep up with everything that we're doing. We try our hardest to make sure everybody is kind of informed about all of these different things and how you can be involved. And so thanks for everybody for tuning in, and we'll be here next Wednesday, 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. with another guest. Mr. Adam Hurdle will be joining us next week. We're very excited about that. Talking about some of the things going on in the state legislature with some voter bills. So make sure you tune in for that. And thank you, everybody. Good night.
Take care.